Hello, friend, and welcome to another episode of Artworks for Teachers. I'm your host, Susan Riley, and I'm curious, have you ever had a problem that felt too big to solve? Or maybe just super overwhelming and you didn't know where to start? I think we've all been there, right? In fact, we might be there right now. And in today's episode, I think you're going to find it super practical because my guest is Roger Firestein. And Roger's whole expertise over the last several decades, I cannot give you his exact age, but for a long, long time, has been the study of creativity, particularly around problem solving, how to use creativity to solve problems. He's been a professor, he's been a consultant, he's a creativity guru. And in today's episode, he's going to walk you through a process that you can use to literally solve any problem, no matter how big or how small. But I want you to pay attention at the very beginning because we talk about something that nobody else really discusses when it comes to creativity and problem solving. And that is answering the right question, knowing which is the right problem to solve. And so knowing that is going to change everything for you. So Roger's going to deep dive into finding that right problem. How do you do it? How do you search for it? And then how do we solve the problem using creativity? I think it's fascinating. And I think you're going to really find it as helpful, hopefully, as I did. So without further ado, here's Roger. Well, welcome, Roger. I'm so glad you're here today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Susan.
Of course. Okay. So let's start with your story. I love starting with stories. I love hearing about the stories of others. And you, my friend, have had a very interesting journey from music to creativity studies and everything in between. Can you share a little bit of your story about how you first fell in love with creativity and got in this pathway?
I would be delighted to. I actually grew up on a farm in northern Colorado, which is where I'm at right now. As I mentioned to you earlier, over Christmas, I was able to inherit my grandparents' house. So I'm living part-time in Buffalo, where I've lived for 48 years, and now back here on the farm. And it's a really interesting experience to be back on the farm after 48 years, to be living in your grandparents' house, your ancestors' house. But this is where I grew up. And so as I was growing up, I went to a small rural school, and so small school, I think there were 81 people in the graduating class. And the models for growing up were preacher, teacher, or farmer. Now, I knew I wasn't going to be a farmer, okay? I wasn't really good at being a preacher, I didn't think, but I think I do that now also. And so I was going to become a teacher, and I fell in love with guitar. I started playing guitar when I was about 14. My mother made me play piano when I was 8 or 9, and I couldn't stand it, but so glad I stuck with it, because when I picked up the guitar at 14, I was playing in rock bands and stuff, and so I started to teach guitar and here at local music school studios in Greeley, Colorado. And then went to the University of Northern Colorado as a music major, as a guitarist music major. And as I was going through the program, I became very frustrated because I'm not the kind of person that can spend a lot of time in an 8x8 practice room by myself. And I was also teaching guitar students. I had about 20 students at the time, and that's what essentially got me through college. And I was working with my students. I found they were getting really bored with their initial lessons, their basic lessons, that you have to learn for technique. And so I thought if I could get them to be more creative in how they approach their music, they would enjoy their music more. So I started reading about creativity, and I moved from being a music major into this individualized education program where we could essentially design our own course, meet with a faculty mentor every week. And I had this wonderful faculty mentor who was an anthropologist and a musician and a real Renaissance fellow. And so we began to explore creativity. And I started reading about creativity, and I think I kept the bookstore in business in 1976 because I ordered all these special books. And in all the books, in the bibliographies, I found a theme. And the theme was there was one place and two names that came up consistently in the literature. Those two names were Sidney J. Parnes and Ruth B. Knoller, and a place called the Center for Applied, well, it was different called then. It was called the Interdisciplinary Center for Creativity Studies at the State University College at Buffalo, New York. Well, okay, it's in Buffalo, I'm in Colorado. So I started reading about this, and I went to the University of Northern Colorado Library, and I went to the microfiche, And I, I found the phone number of the department, and in April of 1977, I called out there. I got the secretary on the phone, and she said, "Well, Dr. Parnes is here. Would you like to talk to him?" Now, I'm 21 years old at the time, and I'm talking to this rock star in the field of creativity that's written all these books. Susan, what I thought when people gained that eminence is they died. You know, they write books, they die. So fortunately, that's not the case, having written 7, okay? I don't intend to step off anytime soon. So I talked with Sid on the phone. He's wonderful. I get so very, very excited. And I was actually staying at my parents' house just across the driveway now, and I was in the basement phone, and I ran up the stairs, and I said to my mother, I said, "I just talked to Sid Parnes in Buffalo, New York." Do you know what she said? She said, "What? You made a long-distance phone call?" So phone calls from rural Colorado were pretty expensive back in the 70s. Anyway, in June of that year, I went out to Buffalo, took a conference, took a course, knew what I wanted to do, came back here, finished up my degree, and then moved to Buffalo in 1978. I got my master's in 79. I think I was probably like the 4th or 7th person to get the degree. We've now graduated over 800 folks with Master of Science degrees in creativity and change leadership all over the world. I ran a consulting company for a while. I came on to faculty in 1984 as a faculty member, and now I'm an associate professor emeritus at the now Center for Applied Imagination in Buffalo. In 1994, I went to a part-time position to run the consulting business, and I've worked with about 600 organizations worldwide, both corporate, education, all those areas, and I still love what I do very, very much. So that's the story, yeah. And
That's
I
a
was talking
testament.
yeah, it was quite a story coming from Colorado to Buffalo, quite a change. But my parents were very supportive, and here he is. He's 21 years old. He wants to study creativity in Buffalo. What's that? But they've been great. So yeah. So that's the
Oh,
story. Yeah.
that's wonderful. I mean, what a journey. But still,
Yeah.
I'm so glad that it took you here because
Thank you.
honestly, one of the things I love about your work is that you have the ability to make creativity practical and
Thank
repeatable,
you.
which is so difficult for a lot of people because we still have this myth hanging out here that, creativity is just for artists and or musicians, but so for listeners who may not know or aren't aware of the work that you do, can you walk
Yeah.
us through the basics of the creative problem solving process and why that's so powerful?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. First off, there is a myth about creativity that most people don't think they're creative. And we ask people if they're creative, they don't raise their hands. But then I ask the question, have you prepared a meal out of the leftovers in your refrigerator? Have you started a business, failed at that business, started again? Have you found a new way to get the kiddos to go to sleep at night? Have you found a new way to tell someone that you love them? That's creativity. So we're all creative. We all create in different and valuable ways. Now, the thing that's unique about the work that I do is oftentimes the myth about creativity is that you have to sort of leave it to chance. And you work on a project for a while, and then the idea is going to suddenly hit you, while you're taking a bath or while you're showering or whatever. Eureka, there's the idea. Well, that's fantastic if you got the time to do that. But in most settings today, is that you don't have the time to come up to wait for those ideas to come. So we work on the process of deliberate creativity. And the essence of deliberate creativity are 2 types of thinking: divergent thinking, where you come up with lots and lots of options, and convergent thinking, where you select those options. There's another type of thinking that comes in that as well. It's called combinant thinking. We'll talk about that in a minute. But essentially, this process for creativity is a universal process. So whether you're creating in art or in music or in business, we follow a similar pattern. First, you identify a goal or a wish or a challenge. Like I wish I could live in Buffalo and Colorado at the same time, something like that. So, and that's all it is. It's just a goal or a wish. It's not a defined problem yet. Then you gather some data about that, get the background. Then you clarify what the problem is. We can talk more about that in a minute. But this is where we figure out what the real problem is, or the best definition of the problem. And the way we do that is we generate lots of creative questions. And creative questions begin with the words how might I or how to. They're open-ended questions. Then once you diverge out, just select the best of those questions. You generate ideas for solving that. come up with a whole bunch of ideas, select the best of those ideas, then you refine those ideas, make them better, polish out the rough spots, and then you generate all the possible action steps you might need to do, and then you put the plan into action. So first you clarify the problem, you generate ideas, you develop solutions, and then you plan for action. So that's the process. It's universal. This, we make it explicit, and there's a variety of methods and techniques to help you to do each stage of that process. That's essentially the creative process.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I think
Thank you.
I'm a person that I like steps. I like knowing what the process is. I like having things that are repeatable. One thing that struck me when I was doing research for this episode was that I found a quote on your site, which was that creativity isn't just coming up with a new idea, it's solving the right problem. I would love for you to dive into that a little bit more, because I think that's revolutionary. I think that's something that most people don't consider.
Thank you, and I would love to dive into that. Now, let me just push my book here for a minute, and it's in my last book called Solve the Real Problem. It's on Amazon, or you can get it from my website. We'll talk about that later. Here's what I found. Having been in this business now for about 48 years and worked with thousands of different organizations, one thing that I've found in common is that about 99% of the time, what we think is the problem is not the problem at all. It's a symptom of the problem, or what the boss thinks is a problem, or a knee-jerk reaction to the problem. And we do a very, very poor job of defining what the real problem is. The reason for that is we have this penchant for action. It's like, hey, I don't have time to solve the problem. I got to get stuff done. I don't have time to figure out what the problem is. I have to do something. Well, figuring out what the real problem is doing something. And so the way we figure out what the real problem is we come up with lots of creative questions. Just as you can generate lots of ideas for solving a problem, you can also generate lots of creative questions to look at a variety of different ways to look at the problem. And creative questions, as I mentioned earlier, begin with a phrase like, how might I, or how to. Now, for example, there's a big difference between say you're working on a project and you say, well, we don't have any money, or it's going to cost too much. Those statements block your thinking. They send a message to your brain that there aren't any ideas out there, so why even bother looking for those ideas? But let's try something else. How might I reduce the cost? How might I raise the money for this project? Now, all of a sudden, those questions send a message to your brain to begin to search for ideas for solving that, all right? And that's essentially what we do in the clarify the problem stage of the process. And time after time after time again, Susan, I've worked with groups, and what they think is the problem is not the problem at all. And it's about 99.9% of the time, whether these are people in industry, in government, in finance, students, teachers, we come in with this predisposition to what we think the problem is, and then we move forward with that. And the reason why we've done that is, unfortunately, as your research has found, is that schools have taught us to do this. We present the problem to you, you find the answer. 2 + 2 = 4. What's the capital of Poland? Warsaw. Okay, so but we don't ask you to come up with what might be all the creative questions that might be involved in adding these numbers together, or what might be all the ways to create a capital, or something along those lines. We've been giving you the questions already formed. And the question-making process is really the essence of creativity, really the essence of science. Because science and discovery begins with questions. It oftentimes ends with answers, and questions are oftentimes much more important than answers, because they lead to whole new forms of discovery. So that's the thing that I found essential. And then so the impetus for this book was, after I wrote Create in a Flash, I began to do work with medical students. And one of the things that they wanted us to work on, the instructors said, we want you to teach these medical students how to ask questions, how to come up with more questions to not only come up with a differential diagnosis, but figure out what and the whole person, not just this, but what is the whole, and we talk about that in the book. So that was one inkling of this. The second was, I was hired by the Department of Defense to work with Strategic Command, which is in charge of all the cybersecurity and nuclear security of our country. And then my client said, I want you to come out and help our people to figure out how to find problems. I said, wait just a minute. You guys are in charge of nuclear security and cybersecurity. What do you need me for? And my client said, well, we live in a command and control environment. What the admiral says or the colonel says is the problem, when oftentimes it isn't at all. So I did some work with them, and then that was the string that started the book. And a book, as you know, kind of starts with a string, and it kind of eats at you until you have to write the book. So
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I think everybody, we're gonna put in the show notes how you get the book, because I think the book answers the how question, like how you create those questions. My follow up to that is then, how do you know that you've gotten to the right problem?
A very good philosophical question, all right?
Because my brain is one of those brains that jumps. I mean, I'll fully admit it. I jump to the this must be the problem, and I will go fix it. So, and I'm learning the power of the pause as I get older. You know,
Yeah,
being able
5 minutes.
to
Yeah,
wait,
yeah, yeah.
right? So, but how do you know that you've gotten there?
Well, let me talk about the power of the pause in a minute. Let's put a pin on that. But let's talk about how do you know when you got there?
Yeah.
And the answer is you don't. You don't know. That's soothing. Okay. So, but here's the deal. If you came up with one definition of the problem, and then you came up with 30 different definitions of the problem, and you looked at that whole array of problem statements or creative questions to choose from, there's a 95% chance that the best problem is somewhere in there, and it's always not the first one. So the idea, see, the problem you see is the problem that you solve. So if you're able to see lots of problems, which aren't necessarily a bad thing, then you can say, hey, that's not it, but this is closer to what everything I know says it is, okay? So that's miles ahead of saying, like, I'm going to grab this one and generate ideas on it. So you can confidently go in to the next stage of the process, idea generation, and saying, I've looked at all the possible problems here, and this seems to be the best problem to solve at the time. And I had arguments with it, not arguments, but debates around one of my colleagues. I wanted to call it solve the best problem. He said, no, people aren't going to get that. He said, you want to solve the real problem, because you don't know if it's a real problem until you solve it. But your chances of coming up with a better solution are significantly increased because you've generated a whole bunch of ways to look at the problem from a whole variety of angles. So then you can go in with the assurance that, based on my best thinking right now, that's what we need to solve, as opposed to based on my knee-jerk reaction right now. That's what we need to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and teachers and students and parents, we're all in education. We're all facing lots of different problems, lots of different challenges, right? So how have you seen that the creative problem solving process has maybe been helpful or made a difference in that arena?
Boy, this is I'm so excited about this because a number of things. I work with a lot of teachers, and we've had teachers that have come through the program, and teachers that have done their degree with our master's degree program go out and they work with students to not to find the problem areas to work on, not to give them an assignment, but what might be all the problems associated with this. So it opens up their thinking. Now, the thing that I'm really excited about right now is I'm doing some work with an organization called ERA, Educational Revolution Association. This organization was founded by a teacher who became a very successful entrepreneur, made a lot of money, sold his company, and then wanted to devote his money, his time, to helping students to give students life skills like creative problem solving, emotional intelligence, presentation skills, financial skills, interview. And we're working now with 9th to 12th graders. And I just had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to work with the teachers and the administrators. What they've done is they've taken Create in a Flash, my 6th book, which has a whole learning program with it. They've designed 12 lessons around it as far as creativity, and they're going to be teaching that to 9th to 12th grade students. And a big part of that is problem clarification. And so when you give this to people and they start and they see how well it works, it's like what you said, why haven't I ever been introduced to this before? The thing is that once people begin to see there's options in the way I view this problem, that's extraordinary. And it gives people so much more power, so much more control over their life, because what they're confronted with, that's not it at all. It could be over here, over here, over here, over here, over here. So we've used it with students in all grades, and now this whole initiative that's moving forward right now is really, really, really exciting. And we have 10 pilot schools now. We should be moving all across the country with it. Yeah.
So I think what's super helpful here, though, is first of all, when we're talking about education, there's so many different layers of problems, right?
Right.
And so I think educators try to attack problems that are so much bigger than maybe they need to or should be looking at instead
Oh,
of the smaller problems that they can actually attack. How do you advise, like when you're dealing with an industry like education,
yes.
how do you advise people to select not just the right problem that is the real problem, but the problem that they can actually solve?
Yes, and this is why the idea of selecting the best problem is where we begin with the book. So let's say there's a big overall challenge, a big overall goal or wish. Well, instead of trying to go after that, do some problem redefinition. How to, how might, how to, how might, how to, how might. We just did this with administrators a couple of weeks ago on this, and it was a goal or wish. It would be great if we could. The goal was it would be great if we could make more connections with our students and potential employees. Okay, employers, okay, that they could then interview and work with. Well, that's a great goal, but it's not a statement of the problem. And so if you were to try to generate ideas against that, they would be abstract and they wouldn't have any traction. And so what we did was we said, okay, that's the goal. What do we know about it? Got a little bit of data out, and then we generated a whole bunch of creative questions. And then we were able to break those creative questions down into various avenues or tributaries, if you would, that would solve this big problem. So we'll go after this one and solve it, go after this one and solve it, and all of a sudden, this big problem becomes much less of a problem because you've dealt with all the factors contributing to it. And 9 times out of 10, people are going to say that wasn't the problem at all. It was this, it was this, it was this. And oftentimes, there's a number of sub-problems that come out with that. Well, that's great. So you hit them one at a time. Okay, so here's the problem here. Let's generate some ideas for this. Solve this one. Here's the other one. But they're identified. They're out in front of you. You can see them. They're on a flip chart. They're listed there. You can check them off as you solve them, and there's great satisfaction in doing that. So that's what I work, and that's what recommends really practical. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like eating an elephant one step at a time, just like one bite at a time.
One bite at a time, Susan. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Roger, a lot of the CPS process sounds similar to like design thinking
Yes.
or the IDEO process, but you've pointed out that these two things are not exactly the same. So tell me, help me unpack the difference on the two types or processes.
First, I just want to go on record to say that design thinking did a lot of borrowing from creative problem solving without a lot of attribution. Yeah, yeah. And so there was, if you look at design thinking, creative problem solving is all a part of that, but there's not any attribution given back to that. So that aside, the difference is design thinking is design thinking. It's designed to do products. It's designed to do things along those lines. So it's great if you want to design a computer mouse. It's great if you want to design a new shopping cart. It's great if you want to design tangible stuff like that. But as far as the more open-ended, as far as the more diffuse challenges, it doesn't work well on that because it needs to come in with something that's a bit more well-defined. Creative problem solving says, hey, it would be great if we could do this. I don't have any idea how to approach this. It scares me. I don't know. And so that whole process of clarifying what the problem is so crucial. And then the other thing, too, is really generating lots and lots of ideas for solving the problem and then picking the best one. So going for the quantity in coming up with creative questions and also the quantity in generating ideas. But that's where creative problem solving subsumes lots of other processes. It's eclectic. It's big enough to subsume those, and then from that you can pull out things like design thinking, like synectics, like other thinking tools. But the whole granddaddy of them all, the whole general system, really is the whole creative problem solving process. So that's the main differentiator, and that's why it's so appealing to teachers and stuff, because it's like, oh, we can use this with our students on something that's not an invention. So, yeah.
Yes. Well, and I think, too, there's been such a for a long time, there was a real focus on the development of things, right? And I think one of the maybe positives of AI that maybe we're not really thinking about yet is that the thing is no longer the thing. It's all of the other
Right.
contributing factors, the things that are going to be more meaningful, maybe long term, than something that is disposable.
Right.
And that's where I find this process really valuable. So I have to ask, you have a snippet on your site that says that you helped Clorox solve a 77-year-old problem in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think you want to talk about value when people are like, well, design is all about value. Oh no, I think solving something that's been a thorn in your side for almost a century in 15 minutes is something valuable. So I would love to hear about that.
Yeah. What I can, boy,
You don't have to talk about the
this
problem, but
is
I would love to hear
proprietary.
the
Yeah. So
process.
let me
Yeah.
just say this. So what they did was there's a certain product that Clorox had acquired, and when you use this product, what generally happens is you keep the product wet, and so but the product was decomposing when it was kept wet. Okay,
Mhm.
so there
Okay.
was always the instructions, keep it wet. And so the biggest complaint from customers is that the product would break down. Well, one day an engineer said, "Well, let's flip this around. What if we kept it dry?" And so
Mhm.
by keeping this product dry, essentially they developed a solution that kept the product dry, and it's totally switched the product around, totally made a significant difference. But it was just that change of view, and oftentimes just that simple. Well, what if we kept it wet instead of dry? And the breakthrough in that came in 15 minutes. The whole
Wow.
idea of saving General Motors, what was it, $50,000 a week on how they
Yeah.
produced the ring gears that go in cars, was coming up with an idea there was a problem with the ring gears were sticking in the die. One of the folks that works on it was, well, why don't you spray them with a vegetable product, Pam? That led to the idea of a solution that they would spray on the die that would allow the metal not to stick. Now, that's another type of thinking, and we can just talk about that. So we talked about divergent thinking, we talked about convergent thinking. There's another type of thinking, it's called combinant thinking. And combinant thinking is borrowing ideas from different disciplines, different areas.
Mhm.
So we're working on a mechanical problem here, and this person came up with an idea from the cooking area and
Yes.
blended that in together. That's that type of thinking. That's
Yeah.
combinant thinking, combining things in a different way, and that's the
And
real
that's what
essence of creativity. Yeah,
that's what we promote with arts integration and STEAM all the time
yeah,
is
yeah.
being able to connect two areas that maybe wouldn't normally be connected in a natural way, right? So um, I'm a big fan of that kind of thinking, but it takes a bit. You've got to be able to practice. I think you got to be able to practice all of them and have
Yeah, yeah,
skills and
and
tools,
it's beautiful when you say
right?
about practice. And one of the things that we do also when we're working with groups is we always do a warm-up exercise before we work on the real problem. And so we work on something like really silly. Say you're working on a really, really serious problem. Well, if you were to go in and try and solve that problem with that mindset, you would go nowhere. All right.
Yeah,
So we work on problems like, how to get a hippopotamus out of a bathtub. How to get an elephant out of a refrigerator. Fun, goofy, what to do with 10 million ping pong balls. What to do with 10,000 boom boxes that they have. So fun stuff like that, and people loosen up with that, and
yeah,
they have fun, and then you take that energy and the learning that they have from that, and then apply it to the real challenge. And I'll often ask groups, I'll say, well, what would have happened if we would have worked on the tough problem first instead of the warm up? And it's unanimous. They'd say it wouldn't have worked. It would have
yeah.
failed. So
So
yeah, go ahead.
sorry. So with that in mind, is that what you would advise teachers who might have like limited time or might be feeling stretched thin? Would you advise them maybe to start with something simple or silly before you actually put this into your classroom as a full-fledged, process?
Absolutely, all the time, unequivocally. And so
Mm,
that's what I can say for sure, all right? Because in
yeah.
my career, when I neglected to do that, I neglected to do that twice. That was early on. I had to go back and do a warm up, all right? It's that
Mm,
important. And in this work that we're doing with Education Revolution Association, we build in the warm-ups into the learning activities. Now, here's the deal about a warm-up. It's only 5 minutes. Yeah. And it's important that people understand the purpose of a warm-up. It's a training session, okay? And when I work with my military folks, I say we're going to train first before we go on the mission. When I work with my performing folks, it's like we're going to practice first before we perform, all right? It sanctions the time for speculation, it teaches them the techniques, and it creates a judgment-free zone. So you want to create a judgment-free zone when you want to generate those ideas. And then you also need to give them some techniques. So that's when you teach them the guidelines for brainstorming, defer judgment, strive for quantity, seek wild, unusual ideas, and combine and build into other ideas. And so work on something fun, work on something silly, play around with the connection making process on that, and then work on the tough problem.
Oh. Well, Roger, I could talk to you all day, but unfortunately,
I took
we're
you all
like
in. This is
running out of time. Yeah. So before we go, though, where can our listeners go to learn more from you, to connect with you, and to dig deeper into your books and resources?
Yeah, just go to my website, rogerfirestein.com, and I'll just show you it's spelled Firestin. And there's the books that are on there. There's a 9-part series on innovation that we've done through the Open Sesame e-learning platform that's with its high production quality. We're using that with a number of organizations, with this educational organization as well. There's also an entire online course that's based on this book on how to facilitate creative problem solving. Lots of free resources, lots of free blogs, videos, and stuff, and my Innovation Espresso newsletter that you can sign up for. It's free. And it comes out just about every month. And don't worry, it's all written by a person, not AI. So I write. And we write them for fun. So we write articles about hanging around on a farm and doorknobs. So, yeah.
Well, I love it. And we will put all of those links into our show notes for today. Roger, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.